Hi folks, it's day 89 today, so I think it's the penultimate day. My video diary ends tomorrow, so day 90. Today's been pretty intense actually. Like I said yesterday, I had an appointment with occupational health at work today to see about whether or not I was ready to go back, and it didn't go the way I wanted it to, I don't think. Although it went probably the way I thought it would. Unfortunately, they decided I wasn't ready at the moment to go back. The level of kind of depression, anxiety I'm at the moment, it just isn't the right time. And I have to take her opinion, the occupational health consultant. She seems to kind of know her stuff. She even mentioned a diagnosis today, which I've never been given before, but which kind of describes me pretty well. So she called it unipolar depression. I think it was unipolar. Yeah, I think. So instead of bipolar, where you have like manic episodes where you're really up, and then you have like really bad depressive episodes, so you're really down. Unipolar people just have the downs. They don't have kind of like the ups. They just kind of get back to maybe normal for a little bit and then they're down again. That kind of describes me pretty well. I'm not sure. That's a diagnosis I've never heard before in the last 2 years, So I'm going to kind of mention it to my psychiatrist next time I see him. Feels kind of like it would be good to have a diagnosis like that, because that sounds exactly like what I've got. I have just persistent low mood, really bad depressive episodes, and occasionally I'll kind of surface from those for a while. Never get to those kind of manic stages. I feel like I'm missing out. I feel like all I'm getting is all the crap, the lowness. I'm not getting any of the manic highs. Maybe I want to experience something like that occasionally. I don't get that. Although obviously I don't want to be a manic depressive or bipolar, because that's, I've got problems enough. I suppose I don't need any more. As fun as some of the manic episodes I've heard about can be. That leads me on to kind of being hospitalized. Like, I've spoken about this so many times, and I'm nearly out of time in my video diary, so I did want to do a video about my hospitalization. And it was a really tough time, actually. The first time I went in, it was probably the lowest I've ever been to date. I'd kind of hit rock bottom. I was at the point where I was planning to kill myself, and I had a whole plan in place that I was going to put into action. And I even had like emails that I'd written to people that I'd kind of set up to be delivered after I'd done whatever I was going to do. I'm not going to go into details, but I'd researched it and I'd found out everything I needed to know. And it was a bad time, it really was. And I think it was kind of Fran that saved me from that kind of period. Just the thought of her and how she would feel if I'd gone through with what I was going to do. That's the only thing that stopped me in the moment. So, I contacted her and told her about it, and she kind of got on to the case and contacted my psychiatrist, and we had an emergency appointment, and he decided that it was probably for my best interest to go into hospital. At the time, I didn't want to do that. I was kind of very reluctant, but I was given kind of like two choices. Either I go in voluntarily or I get sectioned, so I didn't want that. So eventually I decided to go in. I should probably point out as well, I'm in a very, very fortunate position where I'm kind of covered under friends' private medical health insurance. So I ended up going to a private mental health institution. I've never had any experience of NHS kind of mental health units. I've visited people at various times of my life in mental health NHS units, and it wasn't pleasant. It wasn't a very nice experience, and my psychiatrist kind of made a point of telling me, because he does a lot of work for the NHS. Um, you know, the NHS mental health units aren't the best. They aren't the best. They're understaffed and under resourced, and you know, sometimes it can be quite detrimental to a patient's mental health, even though that's the place where they're being sent to kind of look after themselves. So, like I said, I was very fortunate that I got to go into a private kind of psychiatric hospital. I'm not going to name it because I'm worried I might get into trouble if I talk about it, but it was a very sobering experience. You're kind of, you lose any kind of sense of freedom that you have. You know, you're. It was a very kind of comfortable place. It was like, I've described it before as like a travel lodge with crazy people in it, and that's what it was. You know, private rooms, very comfortable. But yeah, any sense of kind of personal freedom was gone. You know, you had people watching you constantly. So I think when I first went in, and I was still going through quite active suicidal ideation, you know, the staff, they kind of do um, patient surveys and stuff to make sure to try and gauge your mood and how you're feeling and what's going on in your mind. And I happened to mention that I was still thinking about, you know, killing myself, and how I'd given the room a once over when I got there to see how I would do it. I mean, the rooms were very kind of suicide proofed, as they should be, I guess. But because I'd mentioned it, you know, I was immediately put on suicide watch, which meant that I wasn't allowed to be on my own at all at any time. And that kind of losing that kind of sense of freedom where you're not even allowed. I think at some one point I couldn't even go to the toilet without somebody watching me. It's a horrible experience, and yeah, it wasn't something I enjoyed at all. And I can look back now in hindsight and see that, you know, maybe it was for the best. It's what I needed in the moment, and yeah, as hard as it was, I kind of had to accept it. Um, Interestingly, you know, one of the biggest issues I had when I first went to the hospital was I couldn't sleep. I couldn't get comfortable in there because it's like the complete opposite of normal life. It's, you know, you're kind of regimented almost, that you have to kind of have your medication at a certain time, you have to eat within a certain time, you have to kind of not necessarily go to bed at a certain time, but they're, you know, they do encourage you to sleep, and I just couldn't sleep. And it turned out that the person I was on 1-to-1, which means that somebody's kind of watching you all the time. They do shifts, I think like 6-hour shifts, and yeah, I couldn't sleep one night, but the nurse who was kind of sitting in my room watching me, I mean, that didn't help. You know, somebody watching you while you're trying to get to sleep. I don't know. It's weird. It doesn't work, I don't think. So I didn't get any sleep that particular night. He did. Yeah, at about 6 o'clock in the morning, he was like snoring away, and I thought to myself, you know, that was one of the failings, I think, about this private psychiatric hospital. Some of the staff just weren't good, you know, and I'm not going to take away from the fact that being in there kind of saved my life. It did. But there were a lot of failings there, even though it was a private, you know, psychiatric hospital, and it cost a lot of money to be in there. And celebrities have gone in and out of this place, and like the standard of care was very, very varied. So there were some nursing staff that were amazing, that kind of like were there for you and would listen to you and give you like advice, and there were some that just didn't give a shit. That, you know, you could tell that they didn't care. Like that guy was like supposed to be watching me. he was kipping on the job, and they're getting paid like shitload of money for him to kind of make sure I'm not doing anything to harm myself. There was other members of staff that were kind of mixing up medication and giving patients the wrong medication, and patients were having to tell them what they should be having, and it shouldn't be like that. It wasn't very professional. But at the same time, some of the nursing staff were unbelievable. Really, really good. So it was an interesting experience being in there. Like I say, it did save my life. I think at the time I needed to be in there. I look back now and I see that I needed to be in there. Um, so yeah, I mean, nobody ever wants to be hospitalized. It's not something to aspire to, I don't think. And when you're kind of not forced but actively encouraged to go in to kind of look after yourself, when you're not used to giving a shit about yourself, it's a big adjustment kind of period, and that's what happened to me. It took me a long time. They're very good as well because they try and keep things structured for you. So there's a lot of routine. There's a lot of kind of from 9 to 5 every day. There's stuff going on. So there's like group therapy sessions. There's education classes where they're teaching you about CBT and DBT and art therapy and yoga, and there's like a whole range of things to do from 9 to 5 every day. And I can see the importance of that. When you're in that kind of situation, you do need its structure. I didn't know what was going on when I first went in there. I was completely lost, and I was broken. And that kind of, they helped me, just encouraged me every day to kind of do this or to do that or to go to this class or to just go to group therapy. Just don't even get involved, just be there. And over time, over a few days, I finally got off one-to-one, so I didn't have a guy sleeping in my room or watching me while I was trying to sleep. But they still kind of maintained 15-minute checks or hourly checks depending on what they felt you were like, your mind frame. And yeah, I started going to like the group therapy and doing kind of like the other stuff, like the educational stuff and the art classes. And over the course of maybe 2 months, I think I was in there for, yeah, I got a lot out of it, and when I look back now, before I went in, I was adamant that I didn't need it, that I didn't want to go into hospital. I didn't want to be that person that ended up being hospitalized because of their mental health. And I look back now and I see how wrong I was. I see the place that it has in, those situations, because it helped me get to a place where I was stable enough and I could kind of start to work on my issues and actually recognize my issues. Yeah, it was a necessary evil, I guess, being in hospital. And that was the first time I went in like for 2 months, and then when I came out, I was determined to kind of not go back again. I was like, no, this is it now. I've progressed to the point where I'm stable enough mentally that I can not be in hospital and I can look after myself and I can be safe. And ideally, I would have loved for that feeling to have continued, but in certain situations, you can't help it. It just doesn't work out that way, and I've learned that as well over the last 2 years. So unfortunately, I ended up being hospitalised again for another couple of months, and it was a completely different experience this time because I knew how it worked this time. So I got what I wanted out of the experience without having to go jump through all the hoops that I had the first time round. And again, I got to a point where I felt stable enough and well enough to not be in hospital, and I got out, and I haven't been back since. I think that was October last year. So there have been times over the last few months where I've felt that kind of frailty almost in my mindset, that I know that I can't cope, and that I feel really overwhelmed with everything that's going on around me. But part of me is determined not to go back into the hospital, because it's a horrible experience. It's not losing that level of freedom, and it's not something I want to do regularly. It's not, it has its place, and it had its place for me, and it helped me get to a point where I'm able to kind of continue and function. And even though over the last few months there have been times where I felt like I could easily have gone in because I felt so overwhelmed, I haven't. And I'm trying my best to kind of, everything I've learned while I was in there, I'm putting that into practice, and I have changed because of it. And I think I've become a better person. I'm better able to kind of tell what's going on inside of me now, whereas before I used to kind of ignore it and just let it build up and build up and build up. Whereas now I'm better able to understand my feelings and my emotions and the reasons why I'm feeling those things, and even some techniques and methods of trying to not get over them, but to kind of make them bearable.